because of the way memory is stored in the brain and how we can access some of those long-term memories through music, even in the case of disease or injury, it's really amazing what can happen. And for me, that just points out to the brilliance of our Creator, that He would give us this incredible gift that we can create, we can experience, we can share with others, and we can connect to Him and His Spirit, all through music.
Welcome to the theFormed.life podcast, where we aim to help you follow Jesus in all of life. My name is Paul Brandis, and I serve as the campus pastor at our Shawnee campus. And today, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest to you, Amy Wilson. Amy is a longtime congregant of Christ Community and is a board-certified music therapist. In this vital and interesting work, Amy has served at St. Luke's Hospital in hospice care, and currently she works in behavioral health. She has a BA from Oklahoma State University in piano performance, a master's from UMKC in music therapy, and is actually currently pursuing her PhD in this field from KU. My co-host, Bill Gorman, and I, we were honored to get to interview Amy about the power of music in God's design and how He often uses it as a pathway to healing. It was an awesome conversation, and I'm excited to dive right into it. Amy, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's fun to get to sit down. I go way back, especially with your husband Joey and middle school pastor days at Leawood, and we're thrilled, Bill and I, to get to have this time here with you and to hear a little bit about what you get to do each and every day. So thank you.
In fact, on the previous episode of the podcast, we talked with Paige Wiley, who works at Made to Flourish, and the importance of how Christians should integrate their faith and their work. That's something that's been really important to us at Christ Community, as you know, for a number of years. And so one of the things we like to do, both in our services on Sunday mornings, but also here on the podcast, is just hear from congregation members about their work. What do they do on Monday when they go to work in all of life, whether that's paid or unpaid? And so we really wanted to sit down with Amy and just get to hear about what it is that you do and how God has gifted you and equipped you for that work. So you are a music therapist. That's your training. So I'd love to hear, what does that mean? What does your day look like? And also, what is your training goes into becoming a music therapist? So you're doing some kind of mental health and therapy kind of training in that sense, but also clearly musical training involved in that. So I just would love to hear about that and how you've prepared for this career.
Yes. Well, I'll start by just explaining what music therapy is.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's applying music in the context of a relationship. And the goal is either some kind of learning objective, like in schools, or it's a health objective, as in a medical setting. And we use music to achieve those goals, but it happens within the relationship. And I think it might be helpful just to start with my story and how I even came to know what music therapy is and why I felt especially called to it. So I grew up in Oklahoma, and my parents are both in medicine. My mom was a nurse in oncology, and my dad is a physician. He just recently retired after more than 40 years of practice.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up kind of just understanding that you use your work and your life to care for other people. And I also loved music. And so I started piano when I was 5, and then later began playing violin, and then guitar came later. And
was your family musical? Like, would your parents, where did that come from?
They enjoy music. I think I took it a few steps further.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but they supported me in the most wonderful ways.
That's lovely.
So I've always been a planner, and I started thinking in middle school about what I might want to become. And I was so drawn to medicine and helping people, but I also wanted to stay home with my kids someday, like my mom had done. And my mom got me the book. It's called Music is Medicine when I was in middle school. And it's by a woman named Jafforia Lane, who is one of the leading music therapists, I would say, in the world. And she started the program at Ireland Cancer Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And her background was as a vocalist. She was a soprano and trained at a music conservatory, and then came upon music therapy later, also in the context of going through breast cancer herself. And her faith, it's a part of everything that she does. And so I was really drawn to her story and what she had done. And I said, right then and there, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I was made for.
As a middle school student?
Yes.
Wow.
So then I tried to have some experiences to see, well, is this going to fit for me?
Sure. Yeah.
And because of my dad's connections, I did some volunteer work in hospitals and had a really significant experience, actually through my church in our Sunday school class. I was with a group of girls from 7th grade to 12th grade in our Baptist church at the time. And I don't remember the context or why, but we started visiting a woman in the hospital who was pretty much alone and essentially dying of cancer. And we visited her on Sundays for months. And I don't think this would ever happen now. But we got to be a part of just her journey. And there was a Christmas that several of us actually played stringed instruments. And so we brought them. I played violin. And the other girls in the room were just overcome by the intensity and gravity of the situation and stopped singing. And I was the one left playing. And I felt this intense peace come over me.
Wow.
And it was like God was saying in that moment, I made you to do this for my people. And later, the weight of that, emotionally, I was able to kind of process that. Yeah. But I actually had lots of moments throughout my education and my journey where I specifically felt God saying, I made you for this. And I think that's why he kind of turned my attention to hospice care, which is what I eventually ended up doing. And I felt just made for that work. And the only way I can explain that is just by God's Spirit working through me and shaping me through so many different situations throughout my time. So I ended up studying piano and doing a performance degree, which is what DeForia had done. And then I came here to Kansas City, to UMKC, to the graduate equivalency degree in music therapy, which is a mouthful, but essentially it's a master's degree, which includes all that you need to become a music therapist. Okay. So music therapists study anatomy and physiology. They study acoustics. They study their instrument. They study learning, lots of psychology, so that we can really understand what goes into experiencing music, creating music, and then what happens socially through music. So it's really very complex. Yeah. And then you have to sit for a board certification exam.
I was wondering about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my credential is MTBC.
Okay.
And that's what, in the United States, music therapists, that's the credential that you would want to have. And then we also have a code of ethics that we apply to and continuing education requirements. So that's kind of the path that led me here, and I ended up staying here. The job situation was really led by the Lord as well through some relationships that I had established through school. And then one of the nurses that I worked with at St. Luke's, she said, well, I'd really like to hire you here. She'd actually heard DeForia speak before and really understood the power of music therapy. And she said, but I don't have funding, so why don't you call the hospice? So I just picked up the phone, called the main number for the hospice, and my future manager picks it up and said, I've been wanting to hire a music therapist. I mean,
wow.
And so I was in her office a few weeks later interviewing, and I got to work there and start that position for 6 years. And so that really shaped a lot of just what I think of with music therapy and the incredible people who allowed me into their homes that taught me their music, because that is an aspect of music therapy is it's culturally and it's specific to the individual and to their needs.
It's such an intensely personal thing.
Yes, because every person has a unique just background in music and preference and
experiences with music.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
And so also you have to keep in mind, and this is part of the assessment process that music therapists do. I'm constantly monitoring how is this person or this group that I'm working with receiving what I'm doing, because some people can have really negative
Sure.
memories
And
to songs
and powerful
and very
ones.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even maybe they don't understand all of that. So you have to sort of be monitoring that and watching for that.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
hard too, I would imagine.
Exactly. And sometimes it's my job to actually provide that moment of catharsis. And so in that sense, often the music is this kind of holding space for grief.
Wow.
And because music is time ordered, it allows that expectation of, well, when the song's over, this intense experience, it has an end point.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing about music that is so helpful and wonderful in the therapeutic process.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating.
I'm curious, Amy, is there a particular, as we talk about the personal nature of music, and that, is there a piece of music
I was thinking
for
the
you?
same question.
Yeah, like that
Yeah.
you've gone back to. I'm sure there's a whole catalog of music that you love, but is there a song, an instrumental piece that just touches you deeply?
Oh, I would say there are so many. I was trained classically, so that's kind of how I grew up. The piano pieces that I was drawn to were Debussy and Liszt and Bach. I had an experience actually at an all-state orchestra. We were playing the Jupiter from Holst Planets, and it has that, incredible soaring melody. And it was the first time as a violinist that I experienced perfect unison with the whole first violin section playing that. And I had instant tears because it was so beautiful and so powerful. And those were some of the experiences I believe God used to point me to the power of music. So, also so many that I had in church. And I didn't exactly finish my story, but after UMKC, I actually had the opportunity to study with DeForia. She was my internship.
Yeah, don't
No
hide
way.
that.
I
Yeah,
know.
you can't.
That's incredible.
She was my internship supervisor.
Oh, wow.
And it was the most
Did you have her
amazing
sign the book
experience.
from middle school?
totally
Okay, good.
did.
I'm really glad you
I'm
did.
so glad.
I'm very glad you
Yes.
did. I was
Now, does she have-
hoping that was a real thing.
Kansas City connections? Is she, or how did
No,
okay.
so actually, Joey and I got engaged. He moved here to go to seminary, and then I moved to Cleveland.
Okay.
Within just a couple of weeks. And I had already been here and had established some friendships. So I said, okay, here are my friends. And here you go. And I'm going to leave for 6 months and be trained and shaped by this incredible person.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great opportunity. Well, we'd love to know if you can share about some specific stories of when you've seen the power of this in the lives of real people that God has, I like to use this phrase, put in your way. God puts people in our way in all sorts of through different mechanisms, and our sort of Monday work, or the work that we get to do, is one of the ways that God puts people in our way. And so as you've gotten to serve, what are some stories that come to mind about that are just unique or kind of illustrate the impact of music therapy?
Yeah, so one that comes to my mind frequently because it was a long-term relationship. We'll call him Bill.
It's not me.
It's not you.
Well, this is awkward.
So the process in music therapy, we are referred by someone.
Sure.
And so in this case, this was a hospice patient, and his nurse had referred him to me. He had a degenerative neurologic disease that was extremely rare. He had been very successful in his career. He valued mentoring young people, and now found himself not able to speak, really not able to interact very much at all with his loved ones. all of his responses were very delayed and slowed. So kind of like Parkinson's and kind of like stroke, but it was a very rare situation. And so I remember coming out to this beautiful home and thinking, what do I have to offer? And I had been working in hospice at that point for about 5 years and had had so many powerful relationships and experiences with people as they were preparing for end of life and also at those final moments. Oh, wow. But still, I felt, what do I have to offer him?
And most of the time, would that be in a person's home that you would actually enter in? So I'm struck by the intimacy of that as well. Not only the intimacy of music, but taking this therapeutic work into someone's home at this very like liminal, thin moment of hospice. There's just a lot that's converging.
A lot.
So I can, even though my only music expertise is the trombone, and I'm not sure that's a great fit for music therapy, I can almost start to imagine like being on the steps of someone's home and about to cross the threshold and enter in and some of that. So, okay.
Yes, I think you highlight some of the challenges.
Yeah. But beautiful opportunities too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So usually I'd bring in my guitar because I never really knew what the environment was going to hold. Sometimes I'd be in very tight spaces, very close to people. And most often I would use my voice and then play guitar. So with him, I got to know him and his lovely wife, and he had a caregiver that was there. And I realized that he loved music by Frank Sinatra, and he also loved Irish music, and he was Catholic. And so we had some of those connections. So I would start by, okay, what music do I already know that can connect with this person? And then over time, I would learn their favorite songs, which is also a really special thing because it communicates a lot and it teaches me about who they are and who they've been and their story. So in the process of singing those songs with him, I had an instrument at the time. It's kind of like an electric auto harp. I don't know if you know what an auto harp is. It has lots of strings and then buttons to push for chords. Well, this was an electric version of that.
That's awesome.
And it had this tiny touch plate that all you had to do was touch your finger across it. And it kind of sounds like a harp, kind of. So that was his job. And then I played the chords and sang these songs. And so he could create something beautiful with this tiny movement of his finger. Wow. And with his permission, we took video so that his family could have it. And then I used it later to tell others about the music therapy and what can happen. But also sometimes his wife would be there. And so she would hold his hand and play these songs with him. And they would share and talk about the places that they went throughout their life and their marriage. And so you touched on intimacy. And one of my favorite things to do was, it still is, to provide these moments of connection for the family. And the music, it just wraps around them. It provides this beautiful structure. And because of the way memory is stored in the brain and how we can access some of those long-term memories through music, even in the case of disease or injury, it's really amazing what can happen. And for me, that just points out to the brilliance of our Creator, that He would give us this incredible gift that we can create, we can experience, we can share with others, and we can connect to Him and His Spirit all through music. Wow. So anyway, over the course of my time with Bill and his wife, we just provided time to connect. And I think, too, the experience of beauty is really important in those spaces because he wasn't able to go outside or, experience concerts or social events like he had before. And so I brought it to him. Right. And I see that, too, now. I work in behavioral health, and it's amazing when you bring this just glimmer of beauty into this space where there's so much darkness and people are drawn to that beauty, and that connects them as well.
No, I love that. It's incredible.
That story is so powerful. And even as you mentioned darkness and you just talk about the power of music, what's coming to mind for me is that incredible scene. I don't know if we have any Stranger Things fans listening, but in season 4 of Stranger Things, this girl, Max, she's really just being like drawn into this world of darkness and evil. And she's about to get trapped and like never going to be able to come back. In part
on the basis of her having some deep trauma.
Yes.
Is like
anyway. The evil is using her trauma to really kind of enslave her. And in that moment, her friends, and so much of what you've been describing is like music is kind of undoing the aloneness.
Yes.
And her friends come and they put these headphones on her. And they put a cassette tape and they play her favorite song. And
Kate Bush
running up that hill. I mean, who would have thought from 1985 it was like a kind of a song that people liked, but then 30 years later, it reached number one. It reached number one globally because of this moment. When we were talking about this before, and I tell the story of, I was like, have you seen that scene? Does that resonate with you? And you said yes. And tell that story.
Yes. So my husband and I watched this show partly because he was a youth pastor for about 16 years.
That's right.
You got to watch it.
Got to know what all the kids are watching these days.
But also, he was so interested in the friendships.
That's right. Yes, it's the through line of the show.
And it was portrayed so beautifully and I think sometimes very authentically. And so we resonated with that because we worked through just learning how to be a friend with teenagers over the course of so many years. So when we got to that part in the show, he literally paused it and said, "Babe, this is music therapy." I said, "Yes, it absolutely is."
He's like, "I finally get it."
And he does.
He understood before
He does understand it.
Yeah, of course he does. Yeah.
I would agree. It was so powerfully visually and from a narrative standpoint represented. And again, that ties into the way God has wired our brains to store memories and then have those associations to music that can literally pull us out of the depths of darkness.
Because in that scene, again, the way that the producers and the directors put that scene together is as she's hearing this music, it's calling to mind all these moments with her friends.
Yes.
And this evil person is saying like, there's a reason you hide from them, but the music is reminding her of the goodness of those relationships and draws her back. And so you've mentioned another number of times here, Amy, just God's design in the midst of this. And I'd love just to hear more about that as you look at the scriptures. This isn't an accident that music has this power. It's deeply part of God's design, the way he's made us. And so I just reflect on that a little bit.
Yes. So at this point in my education and career, I think, diving even more deeply into what have people been thinking about music and healing since the beginning, and what does that mean for me, and how do my experiences in that also give me perspective. And I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. I was reading some about Pythagoras and his work. And so he was a mathematician, and
he's got a theorem.
That's all I know about him.
So he believed that basically there was music in the celestial bodies in the universe.
Yes, the music of the spheres.
Yes, the music of the spheres, and that the very everything around us basically has a frequency.
Yes,
and that there are ways that we harmoniously resonate. So that everything basically is music. And this was a way that, ancients really thought and framed music, but also the music that we just experienced today. That was practical music to them. But it's in the hymn, "This is my Father's world," the music of the spheres. And I think throughout the Psalms, we see evidence of music is probably bigger than we in our finite minds understand.
100%.
Yes.
Right?
The rocks really are crying out already.
And I think
100%.
people across history have felt this. And so there's that aspect. But the more I learn about neuroscience and how our brains respond to music, even infants around age 25 to 26 weeks in the womb.
Wow.
Yeah.
We can respond to the human voice.
Yeah.
And that connects us to our parents. That's the very beginnings of attachment developing through sound. I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah, I had a congregant on Sunday with a brand new baby tell me that the baby sleeps well through my sermons, and she's convinced it's because they were coming to church when she was pregnant with this baby.
That's
it's like
hilarious.
in the womb, the baby got used to me preaching.
Yes.
It's like, this guy again.
I need
nap time.
Yeah.
So,
Paul Brand is putting people to sleep from the moment they're born.
Exactly, right.
But
There's a
mother's
power around.
voice.
Exactly, right.
Yes.
And
The
music
mother's
uniquely
voice.
in the
That's
midst
right.
of that, even more than a sermon. But yeah,
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
And the natural just way that lullabies, mothers
right.
sing lullabies, and fathers too, of course, but it provides a unique kind of comfort to infants because of the way we're wired by our amazing creator.
Before we even are born, when we're still in the womb. Yeah, it's incredible.
And I think that's amazing.
I wonder, so certainly Paul and I are not music therapists. Most of the people listening to this are not, professionally trained music therapists. But I wonder, what would you encourage us as people who, I think most of us listen to music at some, whether that's on Spotify in the car, or you turn on the radio,
still,
or at church, that kind of thing. We hear music. It doesn't necessarily mean we're always listening to music, but how would you take some of what you've learned as a music therapist and say, here's some practices that maybe you can put into your own life to really tap into God's amazing design with music and some of the therapeutic benefits of that whether that's with us individuals or if we're parents or grandparents with kids that we're caring for, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are so many ways. And now pretty much anything is accessible all the time, which is unique in regards to how we develop our musical preferences. Because it used to be, well, whatever's playing on the radio essentially is what we're going to be drawn to or even know about. I think with that, it's also important to recognize that live music is so valuable and so important. And actually singing with your kids without anything else going on it's really needed and important. I think, live music, it is processed a little bit differently in the brain.
Yeah.
It has less noise for us.
Okay.
And so in a way, it's easier for us to process. And I mean, it feels more natural, right? Because it is.
Is there something around the relational aspect of that too, when it's live,
Yes,
potentially, even like the
absolutely.
incarnational sort of reality of engaging music live, not to diminish the power of Spotify or anything else, but is that part of it as well?
Yeah. And even the perspective of interpersonal neurobiology. I mean, we know this, that we were made for relationships and connection, and to have that through music is even on a deeper level sometimes. So I would say, creating playlists for times when you're feeling a certain way or when you hope to feel a certain way. If you're going to go for a run, you want to think about, okay, well, what's my optimal pace? And then you want the beat of the music to match that.
Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush.
That's right.
Yes.
But I've seen that on Spotify. It sounds like we're doing an unpaid ad for Spotify
probably.
or Apple Music or whatever service you
it
use.
is. Yes.
They have those playlists where you can say like 145 beats per minute for running.
Yeah.
And
So there's that. But also thinking about what's going to stick in your mind. And for me, I was taught a lot of the scriptures through singing songs. And so for kids, that's huge. You know that it's going to stick. And for adults too, that put in your mind the things that you want to be there. So I think that's another idea. And then something that I teach my patients is to have a list of songs that when you're feeling angry and you really want to let it out, have an angry song list.
Yeah.
But the same thing when you're feeling down. What are those songs that might lift your spirits back up?
It's interesting that you name that. I've started after, sometimes I'll have a difficult pastoral care meeting. And a lot of times I'm a learner, listen, so it's like, I'm just gonna put on my podcast playlist. But I've started to shift that and say like, okay, if I've just walked out of a difficult conversation with someone, they're struggling, maybe it's their health, maybe it's their marriage, whatever it might be, just say like, okay, I'm gonna listen to some sad music right now, and just take some time to engage in that way. And it's powerful what even just 5 or 10 minutes of that in the car can do after a meeting.
Yeah, one of my current practices is most days, almost all days when I'm driving home from work, I have an end of work liturgy podcast playlist on Spotify that has 3 or 4 or 5 songs on it that remind me like work is over, family life is beginning, to make that kind of transition. But I'm leveraging the power of music. One of them is, I don't know if many of our listeners are on the Enneagram, and the Enneagram 3 song off of the Atlas Enneagram album by Sleeping at Last is the first one that leads off that playlist for me. So,
nice.
I think we've maybe both seen the power of some of that in our own lives. So, well, as we wrap up, this is a fun question that we always get to do, and especially in these episodes where we're focusing on someone's work, because we've taken a deep dive here. It's been amazing.
So amazing.
But kind of a classic question for us as I get to know you is if you were going to do something else other than the amazing work that you have had the opportunity to do in some interesting and different settings, hospice, now behavioral health, and I know you had a stretch too, staying at home with the kids and that important work, now working outside the home again, and you've known since middle school that you wanted to do this. So maybe this is in some ways a hard question for you to answer.
Right.
But if you could do some different type of work, what would that be? Bill always says park ranger. I usually say sports broadcasting or escape room designer is one of the ones that I throw out there. But what about for you? What might you do other than the great work that you already do?
Well, I love books. So I might be a librarian and just be with the books all day and help people find their joy or that story that would just mean a lot to them.
That's a good one. That's a good answer. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll have some links to. I'm thinking we should link to the book that you mentioned at the very beginning.
Yes.
Remind us the name of that.
It's called Music is Medicine.
Music is Medicine, and I actually wrote a blog. I stole the idea from Bill. I wrote a blog on that scene from Stranger Things about a year ago, so we can link to that. And you have a blog coming out as well on some of these things, and so we'll at some point get that tied into the show notes when it drops. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy.